Welcome to Our Sabbatical Story, episode 7. My name is Rachel and I'm here with my husband Luke. Hello, Luke.
Hello, Rachel. Pleased to be here.
Nice to see you this afternoon.
It's I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
As if I don't see you all day, every day. And we have been recording, we're nearly at the end of this special series of podcast episodes, documenting, reflecting on, and sharing the experiences of our first ever sabbatical, which we took earlier this year. So we haven't actually given any of the episodes really a name.
Oh, I tried to give one a name or what. In our first episode, if you go back and listen, I tried to give them all a name and you wouldn't let me.
Well, I just thought we should make it easy for people to catch up. And I'm not suggesting that you actually write this name anywhere.
But you're saying the kind of
the theme.
Vibe
it's
of
a
this
theme.
episode.
Let's not call it a name. Let's call it a theme.
Yeah, I had themes for every episode.
I bet you did.
Week 2, setting intentions and goals.
Oh, that's too long.
Week 1 was called Celebrating the Past.
Yeah, not bad.
That was a good, actually, go back to that one. That was a good one.
That's not episode 1. That's 2.
No, that's week 1.
Yeah, that's episode 2. See, that's why you can't.
Yeah, it's
anyway.
Confusing. Anyway.
So the theme of this episode, are you ready? You're not concentrating.
I'm lost. Hang on, which week's this? Week 7. I'm ready now. Week 7.
Okay.
Which is episode 7.
Episode 7.
Which week of the sabbatical is this one?
7 and 8.
Yeah, 7 and 8.
And the theme of it is re-entry.
Ooh.
Because I reckon this is one of the things, particularly from our ministry friends, that we've had the most questions about, or the people that we were seeing, which is mostly our friends at Hope You See Charmhaven down the coast, where we were visiting for church services during our sabbatical, were asking us, has re-entry started, or how are you going to do re-entry, or have you planned for it?
One of my favourite comments so far from friends of ours and ministry friends has been, after seeing them recently, so this is kind of, now we're up to about week 6 or something after we've re-entered, still asking us, are you still on sabbatical? Are you still on sabbatical? It's man, I've been back for 2 months. What are you talking about? I'm still on sabbatical.
Yeah.
Anyway, we must still look
fresh. That's how I take that.
Yeah. Anyway, re-entry.
So yes, we were. The short answer is yes, we did have a plan for re-entry, but also this episode we're going to unpack a little bit that our re-entry ended up kind of looking different than what we planned. And so I do want to just set the scene.
I was just going to say too that I think, I'm not sure if you're planning to talk about this, but we planned what re-entry would be like. Mm-hmm. We re-entered, but then I think our takeaway, which we might talk about later, is that we probably could have planned it a little differently. That's my takeaway.
Okay.
I think we probably could have been better prepared for re-entry.
Interesting.
But we'll cover that later.
All right. You'll have to unpack that a little bit later on. So to set the scene, I'm going to read a little bit of my journal entry from the 9th of September. So the 9th of September is when I reflected back on the final 2 weeks of the sabbatical. So for those who are, new to the podcast, the sabbatical went for 2 months, July and August of this year, 2023, and we planned our re-entry to last kind of from the 23rd, 24th of August. We'll unpack what that looked like until our first Sunday back was Father's Day, the 3rd or 4th of September. So that following week, I made sure that I sat down and wrote out my reflections of those final 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just going to read the first part of that journal entry to set the scene.
Oh, good.
You can't wait, can you? So much has happened since the final 2 weeks of our sabbatical.
Sorry, interrupting. When are you writing this?
The 9th of September. I just said that.
Yeah, got you.
So we're back. It's the end of the first week back at work. So much has happened since the final 2 weeks of our sabbatical. To summarise and try to be succinct enough to actually get to the purpose of sitting down to write today, we had planned to ease our way back into our work life gradually over those final 2 weeks. But things didn't exactly go as we planned them. This change of what we had planned was surprising in that in some ways I returned home from Phuket That was the last episode. Go back and listen to it. And started thinking about heading back to work, slightly disappointed that I couldn't see more changes on the horizon, which is ironic to think about now that I'm about to list all the many things that are starting to change. Having sensed God's presence and power so closely and specifically in so many different ways over that preceding 6 weeks of the sabbatical, here we were now pretty certain that God hadn't given us any great revelations about moving away from Cessnock or beyond church, or even of any other big changes in how we were going to be functioning as a family or in our ministry lives in the immediate future. This is coming home from Phuket. If anything, it seemed like we had stirred up our openness and trust in God to ask us to do anything, only for everything to be looking like it was going to stay the same as before, besides some inner transformation work which had changed our outlook on life and ministry. And then the next paragraph starts.
I'm waiting for the next paragraph because that's,
all of that changed almost immediately.
Yeah, that's right.
On the day we first prepared to come back to work. So let's just, we can not read my journal entry now. We can just talk about that together. So here was the plan.
Yeah, let's go through the plan for re-entry.
Yeah. So all along, well, we'd gone back and forth about this, but because we set our board meeting dates for the year for church before we decided to take the sabbatical.
Because we set the board meeting dates in the preceding year, so 2022, about October, November, we would have set our 2023 board dates, and we would have told our board, and they would have locked them in, because they're big people with big lives.
That's right.
And they like to have plenty of notice for the things that are important, like our board meetings.
Yeah. And we only meet quarterly, so we
That's right.
make sure that we get them locked in nice and early. So we had already scheduled a board meeting for Thursday, the 24th of August, which happened to fall about a week and a half before we were due back at work. So we'd spent a bit of time talking and thinking about whether we should go to that board meeting or not. We had raised other leaders to chair the meeting and to do the work of...
Yeah, to be fair, that's what they did. So they still chaired the meeting. They still prepared the minutes, the documents, arranged the meeting. So we really would just be turning up to the meeting.
Yep. But anyway, long story short, we decided that it was still a responsibility that we wanted to carry as board members, to be present for that meeting and to bring a report.
Yeah, to bring a report from the sabbatical, basically.
Yeah, and so that the board, because the board are the governing body of the church, so that they were the first people to hear what our reflections, takeaways, what the experience had been like. They were also the people that had endorsed us to take that period of time away from church. So we wanted to honour that by being present and by being prepared to bring something, a report, a contribution.
We wrote a report.
Yeah.
Have you got that?
I would have it somewhere.
Because that's probably would have been good to have a quick look at.
So anyway, then when we got back from Thailand, because we then had about a week, I think, just under a week before that board meeting, we agreed between the two of us that we would still just rest that week until the day before the board meeting. And because we're board members and we wanted to be prepared, we were going to face our emails for the first time on the day before the board meeting. So that was our agreement we came to with each other.
Good plan. Do the emails, get ready for the board meeting, read the financials, etc., any governance stuff from the folder that the board prepared, ready to go for the meeting the following day.
Yep. And then prepare our report.
Yep.
So we kind of thought we'll give this a chunk of time on the Wednesday, the day before the board meeting.
Yep.
Then we will, so that was the goal of that particular day. We'll read all the emails from the 6 weeks or whatever that we've been gone.
Now, how many emails did you have?
I don't know. I didn't count.
Did you have 10?
No.
Did you have 100?
I would have had more than 100.
Did you have 500?
You've
already got 1,000. You've got 1,000 plus. You've got one of those on your email notifications icon on your email app. It just has the infinity symbol instead of a number.
Who did you have a go at me about something of my personal organisation yesterday in a public forum?
No, you were because your technology skills are a bit lackluster. Anyway. So
Anyway, would you like to change the course of the episode
No,
to
so-
Rachel's technology and personal admin?
So you had some emails to look at.
Well, no, here's what I was going to say. I think out of all the emails that I had to look at, there were maybe 15 that required a response or for me to absorb some information.
Wow, 15 out of 2 months.
Yeah, I reckon.
I was the same. A lot of them would, weren't urgent emails. And I think when you go away and you put your away email responder on and it says, sorry, I'm going to be away till, when someone sends an email and it's like, oh, wow, 2 months' time. They'll just not send you an email then. They'll know.
Yeah.
And so I think having that on there is helpful because it's like, oh,
Totally.
you get to and I think what I found, I did have a lot of emails kind of from the first couple of weeks of the sabbatical, then not much. And then a few obviously toward the end that I then like you, maybe a dozen that needed to be attended to. So yeah.
Well, and I reckon it probably speaks to the fact that we were pretty organised too going into the sabbatical. So people knew that we weren't going to be around.
Yeah.
Like lots of people knew that. Or if they'd forgotten, they sent us an email and got the auto reply and went, oh, that's right, Luke and Rachel are away. So anyway, so that was the plan for the day before the board meeting. Read the emails, face that giant behemoth and write a report for the board, then go back to rest, then go to the board meeting on Thursday night.
Then go back to rest.
And
then have another week of rest.
And then...
Well, no, in that final week we had some plans.
That's what I'm saying.
Go.
So we still had nearly a week of rest, but in that final week leading up to the first Sunday we were back, we set up meetings just between the two of us and the two key leaders that we had asked to carry the responsibility of leadership of the church while we were gone. So we met with each of them one-on-one or two-on-one. We met with our friend Siobhan, who we'd asked to caretake leading our Hunter region responsibilities within ACC for us. So we met with her, and we met with a family whose baby we were dedicating on the first Sunday back. So, and we did all of those. I think 2 of those we did on one day, but we kind of just spaced them out in those last couple of days before being back at work. And that was the plan. And so it meant that we got to still enjoy the final few days of our time that we had taken. So anyway, back to my sentence. All of that changed almost immediately. Well, actually, none of that actually did change.
Yeah, I think what the subtext here is that the bones of the re-entry didn't really change. We didn't really deviate from the plan. However, the experience of the re-entry was not what we expected.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to a couple of things.
Yeah.
And I'll just say one of those things. I'll just speak to not necessarily the details of what happened, but I think I'll speak to we weren't prepared for what it was like to re-enter because we'd never done it before.
Yeah.
And so we work like the sabbatical really does completely remove you from everything to do with the administration, the governance, the leadership of the organisation. So just to give you some context, so for example, we would regularly be looking at the financials probably on a weekly basis, bank account stuff.
More often for me.
Just to see what things are looking like. It might be more often. So, turning all those off and not seeing any, financials, accounts, this applies across the board to pastoral care, to other kinds of governance, but just using financials as an example. So then when you flick that switch, you all of a sudden open up like Pandora's box in literally one moment after having nearly 8 full weeks away from that part of that level of leadership in the organisation. And so I think that for me was like, oh, wow, that's a massive shock. And the emails as well, thankfully, like we've just joked, we didn't have a lot. But still, it's
like an overload of information.
You don't realise it's a flood. It's a flood, and you don't realise. So, you've got the capacity for it because you had this beautiful big long break, and you're ready to get back into it. And as we said, we were excited to get back into it. We had a great plan, but what I didn't anticipate was that it does have a huge impact on you cognitively, emotionally, spiritually. and even physically as you begin to engage in those meetings with people, it just is, it's quite an affront. And so it was a shock to the system in a whole range of ways. So that's what I wasn't prepared for.
Yeah.
And maybe it's something that you can't really prepare for. You just have to know it's coming and just brace for it, because you have to get back into it at some point. And I thought we did a pretty good job at kind of staggering the re-entry and not just turning up one day and going, we're back.
Yeah.
But even in that, it was still quite an intense experience.
Yeah. And I think we were aware of that. Like, I'm thinking about it in like reverse of one of those, reality TV scenarios, for example. Like, let's say The Block, that's one of our favourite shows. So you watch those people on The Block and you watch their world become very insular and because they're taken completely out of their normal context, these people.
Yeah, that becomes their world.
That becomes their whole world. And so for them, it's like excessive activity. For using that particular example, like they're building a house in a very short period of time, they're getting no sleep, but they're also only have the same few people around them. And so then it's like you lose a little bit of grip on reality. So for us, it was a little bit like that, but in reverse, where we were so well rested and we had such a lack of activity, responsibility, time frames, deadlines, a calendar, you know what I mean? Like literally had not looked at the calendar, had not looked at bank accounts, had not looked at emails, had not spoken to lots of people from our church.
Yeah, definitely no meetings.
No meetings, nothing. That even though we were so your world becomes very small and very simple. And then, even though we thought that we'd done an okay job, like without any experience to know, to plan out, not overwhelming ourselves with information and people time immediately. I think you're right. I think you probably couldn't avoid some sense of that feeling as we began to re-enter. So anyway, so the long and the short of it is that when we did start to get across the detail of what life was looking like, I think just the fact of having been separate from it and not in it, it's like when somebody loses weight, and if you're around them every day and they lose 20 kilos over 6 months, you don't really notice it if you live in the same house as them. But somebody who you haven't seen for 6 months and they're 20 kilos lighter the next time you see them, you go, whoa.
Or 20 kilos heavier.
Post-COVID.
Sorry.
When you see them for the first time after COVID lockdowns.
Sorry, guys. It wasn't you I was talking about.
Oh, we all did it. Put on the COVID kilos.
The sabbatical kilos.
You get a shock.
Yeah.
And so that's essentially kind of what happened for us. Now that we've had some time to reflect on it, it's actually not unexpected what we came across, but having a look at some of the information and consuming some of that, absorbing some of that information for that board meeting, I actually wholeheartedly believe that God used it in that timing and at that way to catalyse us toward some changes.
It was as though God was kind of waiting in the background for us to get up to where he was. Like he could obviously see ahead, and he knew that even though we felt like we were waiting for this kind of moment of revelation, oh God, this is what you're saying, telling us to do, this is where we need to go, this is what's next. And God was like, yeah, that's coming. And we're like, God, we had all this time off and we're waiting for this
a big change, what's
a key
the next
moment.
big thing?
And so we'd planned out all these big ideas that we had for our long-term future that we'd look to implement across the next few years. And all the while, God's kind of just sitting there waiting for us to turn up on that day. And as soon as we did, on that Wednesday, we began to re-enter, God was like, here you are. Yeah, that's right. You were waiting for something to catalyse this next season. Well, welcome to the catalyst moment. Here it is. Yeah. And it wasn't what we expected, and it didn't come in the way that we expected it to come. And that's often what happens with things of God. God just turns up in his timing, in his way, and his ways aren't our ways. And so we were like, wow, okay, so these circumstances mean that we are going to make some changes and we're going to make them today. And we're not needing to wait for the next few months or years. And so in the moment it was a bit of a shock, but in hindsight it was, as you said, a catalytic moment that meant that we were it was a catalytic moment that we were, by the grace of God, prepared for.
Yeah.
Because of the sabbatical and the work that we'd done with God and within ourselves. So, go back and listen to those episodes about the dreams and the plans of the future. It's like, oh, wow, God, okay, we're ready to go. Let's just get cracking on some of these plans.
Yeah. And, to bring some clarity without, I don't think it's appropriate for us to kind of go, do a deep dive into the details here in this public forum, but to bring absolute clarity.
Nobody's listening, Rachel. What public forum?
What we're referring to is not anything that was, it's not, none of it's kind of disastrous. None of it's because of anybody's, any bad people issues or, people being irresponsible in our absence or anything like that. It was just we became aware of information that meant that things were going to have to change for next year, and what things looked like for us and in our church context was going to have to change. And now, as you say, that we've had a bit of time to a bit of hindsight and a bit of time to process it, we realised that we kind of knew this was coming, but it was the fact of seeing it all on one day after having had some time off. So if we go back to what you said a moment ago about how we felt on that day, I think we both kind of immediately had a response that, oh, wow. I'll tell you how I felt and then you tell me how you felt.
That's a good idea.
I felt, as I said in my journal entry, that I was actually a bit disappointed that we were nearly going back and I couldn't hear God saying that anything was going to look different. And I'd really done the hard heart work of being okay with whatever God might say. And that's not actually that easy for me, because I like to know what the plan is and I don't like the unknown. I think that's not an uncommon feeling. So for me to be genuinely in a place where I was saying, God, I'll say yes to whatever it is that you're asking me to do next, and then to feel like the time is ticking down towards the end of the sabbatical, the end of this big grand adventure time off that we've put all this effort into planning, and we've enjoyed the whole experience. It's been amazing, but it doesn't feel like... at this point, it feels like we're just going to go back to work and everything's going to be the same way that it always was. And I felt a bit disappointed by that. However, in the moment where it all of a sudden, like with great clarity, seemed to become obvious that things were going to change quite significantly and drastically and quickly, I was actually pretty gutted. And trying to stay calm, a bit fearful of the future. However, I will also say that I believe I was able to process all of those emotions much, much, much more quickly than I normally would, because I was so well rested. That's how I felt. How did you feel?
I think I remember the conversation. And, we're often like this where, like in our, partnership, when one of us is really flat, the other one tends to be a little stronger. And I think we went backwards and forwards a little bit even on that day and then across the next few days where, I'd be like, oh no, what is this going to look like for us in the future? And you're like, oh no, I've processed that. I feel like we're... But then in that moment, I think where you were down, I really felt as though it was an opportunity for us to hold on to what we had taken from the sabbatical.
Yeah, true.
And I felt as though, well, this is God's invitation to us to trust him with what he's imparted into us across those last 7 weeks, where, God had been speaking to me a lot about not rushing, not being rushed by circumstances or by people or by situations, but to only move when God moves and to wait on him, to listen to him, to be patient. And so I just had a sense of God's, God kind of almost putting a challenge towards us to say, well, this is an opportunity for you now to use and be the kind of person that you've been transformed into over these last 7 weeks. So, why would you revert back to a way of living that was pre-sabbatical you, where you might panic, worry, react, instead of now lead out of a place of rest and lead out of a place of inner strength and an identity that's not attached to your ministry, an identity that's not attached to, the circumstances around your life, but an identity that's attached to, who God is and how he's at work in your life. So that was, I felt like initially, this is a bit of a disaster, or it feels a bit like a disaster. Again, like I said, it wasn't, but everything was just like it was a flood in a moment of all this information. It's like, okay. But I think that's how I initially felt. But then subsequently, like you did some processing, I did some processing, and then my processing led me to a bit of worry later on. And over the next few days, we'll both a bit up and down about it. I think it took a few days for us to kind of really both get a bit more solid about, the great opportunity that was ahead of us. Like we were like, oh, okay. And like, to be fair, we're probably still in that process. Like we're still working stuff out. And, we've probably not completely settled on what, the next little season looks like. But I feel like I'm more settled on who we're going to be in that season, not so much. And it doesn't matter so much, I don't think, to us now as what it used to as to what we're going to do. I think what we do will just be whatever God puts in our hand. And it's more important about, how we do it and who we are in it.
Yeah, and I think, I agree with you. We were a bit up and down over those next couple of days, and we do have this lovely thing which I think God has given us in our, our two-person team, our partnership, that where one is low or flat, particularly faith-wise or mood-wise, then the other tends to be full of faith and can lift the other one up, and vice versa. It's Ecclesiastes 4 verse 9, really, isn't it?
Share the work, share the wealth.
Yeah, if one falls, the other lifts them up. Anyway,
two is better than one.
Read it in a wedding service on the weekend. Two are better than one. But I also was cognizant of the fact that we were literally living out something which I think had been a theme over the whole sabbatical. So that whole thing of waiting and just waiting in the moment and trusting God. We had that experience right back at the beginning. I think episode 2 we talked about this, where we went to rush ahead and start to try and plan our post-sabbatical life like almost immediately, instead of pausing to celebrate what had been and just be in that moment of celebration. And then you'd had your time away where, God had spoken to you really clearly about, through that poem, or that letter, about being okay with waiting in the question and not knowing the answer. And then I'd had this experience when I was away on my own where I was trying to solve problems. I was trying to dream about the future. What could this look like? I was, all these imagined scenarios, and then trying to problem solve how to make them actually practically happen. And I had the Kookaburra incident where I just felt like God told me it was okay to just rest in it and to trust God, and I didn't have to know the answer to the how question just yet. And so I really just want to take a couple of minutes to tell a bit of a story of what happened for me personally, because I think I'm more naturally a worrier than you, particularly about God's provision. That's been an area of struggle for me across my whole life, and an area of growth for me to trust God more and more, that he will be the provider that he promises to be. So I'd had that experience, which you can go back and, I don't know, it's episode 4 or 5 or something.
Yeah, and I'll just throw this little curveball in before you get into that. That a couple of other things that happened in that couple of weeks or just after the sabbatical. One of them was I had an appointment with my academic supervisor, like for my Master of Theology. I think that might have been in the last week or the second last week. And then I think in the week after of the sabbatical, like immediately after, I had a meeting with my professional supervisor.
Yep.
And so just those two meetings, the first academic one wasn't necessarily, about my well-being, but just having a conversation with someone after not being really in conversation with anyone about anything other than just, your rest. And that was helpful to have someone else who wasn't from work, who, was interested in how you were doing, because, that matters, And I was able to articulate with them a bit about, where I was at and how that might feed into my study in the future. And, they were just really encouraging. And I think, that was helpful. And then when I met with my professional supervisor just a week after we got back, again, still processing some of these changes that were going to be happening very quickly. Again, just a very encouraging conversation about, the pace at which we had been able to come to some ideas about the future. And again, reflecting back to me that the sabbatical had done such good work in me that, hey, look how well prepared you are for what's coming. Like, just imagine what it would have been like if you hadn't have been where you are today. So those conversations and, the post-sabbatical, the re-entry, I think that my big takeaway is let's not just all of a sudden jump back into everything all at once, but where you can kind of just gradually ease back into things. Because, you don't know what it's going to be like when you re-enter, and that's okay. That's how it should be. But having some kind of, plan is super important. And those 2 meetings weren't planned or intentionally used to help re-enter. But in hindsight, I'm thinking, okay, well, next time we have a big long break, let's make sure there's a few good people in your life that you can connect with post-sabbatical, like right at the end, just so they can just remind you of how far you've come and reflect back to you how different things are and how you are a different person now than you were when you went in.
So you had real people that helped you process what was happening in those first few days after what
did you have?
Well, I'm going to tell you my little story.
AI.
Nope.
ChatGPT.
Nope.
Ooh.
Just God's beautiful creation.
Oh, again.
Yeah,
There's a theme here, isn't there?
Yep. So if you listened to the Noosa episode, can't remember which one that was, 3 or 4 or 5 or something. I'd had that experience with the kookaburra. And then I don't think I mentioned this last time, but on the way home from Phuket maybe I did mention it.
In the train.
Yeah,
you told that story.
I told that story about how there was a kookaburra sitting on the power line while you were asleep. Anyway, so then it's a week later and we've had the Wednesday where we're facing the emails and we realise some things are actually going to be changing. We're not quite sure what they're going to look like, and we had a bit of time to process. We had what we've described as that up and down between the two of us, one being kind of high faith and the other being a bit flat, and vice versa. And anyway, then we had a bit of I think we later in the afternoon had a bit of a conflict conversation about how to function in the board meeting and oh no, that was the next day. So that night I was feeling okay. Like, as we said, we'd had time to process it. Anyway, we go to bed that night and I really didn't sleep very well. And, that's not unusual for me. I do struggle to sleep well. But I'd been awake for a lot of the night, and then I'd had one of those nights, unrested sleep, gone to sleep again very late, like early in the morning, kind of just before you've got to get up. And then this sound woke me up, and it's not unusual for me to have, hear birds waking me up if I'm still on sabbatical and not waking up to the alarm. But this is the first time I can ever remember being woken up by kookaburras, multiple kookaburras. And I think you might have actually gone to the gym.
Yeah, I wasn't there for the kookaburras.
I think you weren't there. Yeah. And I didn't get up because I hadn't slept well, and I was like, stuff going to the gym. So I'd finally kind of drifted off into sleep, and then to be woken up by kookaburras, and not just one, but like a cacophony of kookaburras.
Symphony kookaburras.
On the day of this board meeting that we now had to face and had to bring some kind of,
It was another sign.
It was definitely a sign, and just like I felt like God showing me that he was still right there even in this difficult moment, and that he was still trustworthy to be our provider, and that I still didn't necessarily need to know the answers to all of my questions, and that he wasn't necessarily going to give me the strategic plan for the next 7 years, which I would so greatly appreciate, with step-by-step instructions to follow.
Day-by-day appointments,
No, he was not going to be giving me that, but he was giving me the kookaburras to wake me up with their singing, just, I believe, to let me know that everything was okay. And then one final thing, we got like we're doing okay. It's 24 hours later now. We're getting ready for the board meeting that night, and we did have a conflict conversation that afternoon. I think maybe just about how to communicate what it was we were planning to communicate. We weren't seeing eye to eye, and so I went for a drive, which is what I do sometimes when I just need a bit of time to myself. And I went for a drive on a path that I often walk, which is up a mountain near our house. I just find it very freeing to kind of be on top of a mountain. Did it a lot in COVID, and just look at God's beautiful creation. Anyway, I got not very far along this mountain drive and drove past what I thought was a kookaburra sitting on a fence. And I thought, no, it's not a kookaburra sitting on a fence. That's ridiculous, because now I'm legit starting to make an idol out of these kookaburras.
You're seeing kookaburras under every lampshade.
I know. It's like when you buy a car and then all you can see is that car, that type of car driving around town. I was like, I'm making it up now. I'm seeing kookaburras everywhere. So anyway, I'm looking at the rearview mirror and I'm thinking that thing, whatever it was that I saw, it's still there. It hasn't moved. So maybe it wasn't a kookaburra. It might have been just a sign on the fence or something. And I pulled over and I actually reversed the car on the grass verge on the side of the road. There's no cars around, country road. And towards whatever this thing was, I'm thinking, is it a sign? Is it a bird? If it's a bird, is it a kookaburra? And I came right up adjacent to it. And sure enough, it was a kookaburra, and it was still just sitting there on the fence. And of my 4 kookaburra experiences in the sabbatical, that was the first one I was able to take a photo of. I've got a photo of it
cool.
on my phone, and I just felt, so here I was feeling a bit heightened and a bit aggro because I was like, oh, how are we going to talk about this tonight? And then how can I bring faith and lead this group of people when I don't even know what's happening in my life in the next few months, and blah, blah, blah. And I just felt like, and I'm taking it out on you. And then I just felt like...
That's right, you were taking it out on me, yeah.
I'm glad
that's
like
recorded.
God was, again, like just so kindly telling me that he was there, he was aware, he had it covered. It's okay if I don't know the answer. And I just felt so loved, really, and at peace, because God sent a kookaburra to remind me that he was still there. So that's probably all we really need to say now, to leave it on
the re-entry episode. That's good. I think it gave us some helpful approaches to post-sabbatical, to re-entry, as you wind up a sabbatical. And some things that we learnt that we may do slightly differently next time.
We couldn't have known it without trying.
Yep. And so I know that will be helpful. And then what we haven't really talked about, which I'm looking forward to next time on our final episode, is some of the big takeaways from the sabbatical. Yep. So we did want to come away from that time being able to articulate, what was next, what the next 7 years of productivity would look like, and
who we would be.
Yeah, who would we be across that span of time, and who did we want to become? So I'm looking forward to talking a bit about that next time, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say as well.
So that's it for this episode of Our Sabbatical Story. See you for the final episode.
Oh, I'm going to miss it.
Next time.
Let us know if you're going to miss it, guys. We might do another one.
Do a reunion.
Bye.